The human body begins dying of thirst before you feel thirsty. By the time your brain registers a signal, the dry mouth, the heaviness behind the eyes, the slow thickening of thought, your blood has already been pulling water from your cells for hours. Your kidneys have already begun rationing. Your body has already started making decisions about which systems to keep running and which ones to quietly begin shutting down. In a temperate climate, a healthy adult can survive approximately 3 days without water. In the Sahara Desert in August, where ground temperatures exceed 70 degrees Celsius and the sun removes moisture from exposed skin faster than most people sweat it out, that window collapses to somewhere between 18 hours and 36. Mauro Prosperi knew this. He was an Italian Olympic pentathlete, a former police officer, a man who had competed in ultramarathons across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. He had trained for the specific conditions of the marathon de Sables, the 6-day, 250-kilometer foot race across the Moroccan Sahara that is consistently ranked among the most punishing endurance events in the world. He had the gear. He had the training. He had competed before. On April 23, 1994, on day 4 of the race, he walked into a sandstorm and came out the other side in the wrong country. He would not be found for 9 days. He would survive on things that I'm going to tell you about directly and that you're going to find difficult to hear. And the mistake that put him there, the single decision that separated him from every other runner in that sandstorm, was not a dramatic error. It was not recklessness or arrogance or ignorance. It was the kind of mistake that any prepared, experienced, intelligent person makes exactly once in a situation they have almost but not quite encountered before. He kept running. Let me tell you what the Marathon de Sables is, because without understanding what it asks of the people who enter it, you cannot understand what happened to Mauro Prosperi. The race covers 250 kilometers across the Moroccan Sahara over 6 stages run across 6 days. Competitors carry everything they need to survive on their backs: food, sleeping gear, emergency equipment, with water provided at checkpoints. The race is self-sufficient in the specific way that extreme endurance events describe as self-sufficient, meaning the organization will not save you from the desert, but will hand you water at regular intervals if you can reach the points where the water is. The Sahara through which the route passes is not the Sahara of popular imagination. It is not all dunes. The Marathon de Sables crosses Reg, flat gravel plains that shimmer with heat haze and offer no shade and no landmark. It crosses Erg, the deep sand dunes that can reach 300 meters in height, that shift with the wind, that look the same from every angle. It crosses rocky Hameda where the ground absorbs heat and radiates it back at angles that disorient the eye. In 1994, the race had GPS as a theoretical technology, but not as a standard issue competitor tool. Runners navigated by compass and by race markers, flags planted by the organization at intervals to mark the route. When a sandstorm comes, the markers disappear, not because they are knocked over, because visibility drops to 0 within minutes, because the sand moves horizontally at speeds that make forward progress feel like swimming against a current, because the world reduces to a radius of approximately 2 meters and everything outside that radius, the other runners, the flags, the route, the horizon, ceases to exist. The sandstorm on day 4 lasted approximately 8 hours. Mauro Prosperi ran into it with the rest of the field. He had been in a good position in the race, moving well, experienced enough to know that storms were part of the event and that the correct response was to use a compass bearing and keep moving in the right direction. He used his compass. He kept moving. The storm was stronger than anything he had encountered before. The compass bearing was correct. The direction of travel was correct. But in the Sahara, correct direction of travel and correct destination are not the same thing. Wind doesn't just reduce visibility. At sufficient velocity, sustained over hours, it alters the subtle geography of the terrain. The angles of dunes, the firmness of ground, the micro-navigational cues that experienced desert travelers use without consciously acknowledging them. He came out of the storm and looked around. The markers were gone. The other runners were gone. The landscape was featureless in every direction. He had been running for several hours into a storm that had been pushing him, without his knowing, approximately 90 degrees off his intended bearing. He was not in Morocco. He was in Algeria. 200 kilometers from the nearest race checkpoint, alone, with enough water for the rest of the stage he had been running. Meaning, in the recalibrated mathematics of survival, perhaps 12 hours of hydration in an environment that demanded constant replacement. I want to be precise about the geography because it matters enormously. The Morocco-Algeria border in the region the storm pushed him into is not a line on the ground. There are no border posts in this part of the Sahara. There are no roads, no settlements, no infrastructure of any kind for enormous distances in multiple directions. The two countries were, in 1994, in a state of deeply strained relations. The border between them in this region was, and in some areas remains, effectively closed. Crossing it was legally complicated in ways that were entirely irrelevant to Mauro Prosperi's immediate situation, which was that he had no idea he had crossed it and wouldn't know for days. He knew he was lost. He did not know how lost. The difference between those two knowings is the difference between a problem with a solution and a situation with a horizon. The first day he walked, he oriented by the sun, east in the morning, west in the afternoon, and moved in what he calculated was the direction of the race route. He found no markers. He found no runners. He found no landmarks that matched anything in the race documentation he carried. He rationed his water immediately and precisely, the way a trained athlete rations resources when a situation changes. He allowed himself a measured amount per hour. He kept moving. He found a marabou, a small Islamic shrine, a white dome structure no larger than a single room, abandoned, empty, but shelter. He stopped there as the sun peaked and waited out the worst of the midday heat. There was nothing in the shrine, no water, no food beyond what he carried. There were bats. This is a part of the story I told you would be difficult. A human body losing water at the rate the Sahara extracts, it cannot be sustained by the water that food contains, cannot be sustained by careful rationing alone, cannot be maintained at any level of function, without input of liquid that does not exist in the environment around him. Mauro Prosperi knew this. He was a trained athlete and a trained police officer, and he had a working understanding of survival physiology. He killed the bats. He drank their blood. He ate what he could of them raw. Blood is not water. It is approximately 90% water, mixed with proteins and cells and compounds that a dehydrating body processes imperfectly. It is not enough, but it is something. And in the Sahara, something and nothing are not equivalent. He did what he had to do with the precision and absence of drama of someone who has already moved past the part where disgust is a relevant variable. On the second and third days, he walked. He walked at night when the temperature dropped to survivable levels and rested during the day in whatever shade he could find or construct. He was looking for the race markers. He found none. He was looking for aircraft. The race organization searched by air for missing competitors. He saw none. He constructed signals. He arranged rocks in patterns visible from above. He rationed everything he had with a specificity that was, by his own later account, completely calm. Not because he was not afraid, because fear in the Sahara costs water. Every elevated heart rate, every spike of cortisol, every moment of panic has a metabolic price in the body that has no reserves to pay it with. He chose calm the way you choose a tool from a box, deliberately, because it was the right instrument for work. On approximately the fourth day, something happened that in almost any other survival account would read as the moment of maximum crisis, but in this story reads as something stranger. Mauro Prosperi decided to die on his own terms. He was not delirious. He was not confused. His account of this moment, given in interviews years afterward, is lucid and specific in a way that suggests the decision was made with full faculty intact. He had been lost for 4 days. He had consumed most of what he carried. He had found no water source. The search aircraft had not appeared over his position. His calculation, based on known physiology, known resource depletion, known geography, was that the probability of rescue before his body reached a point of irreversible collapse was low. He did not want to die by degrees in the sand. He wrote a note to his wife on the only paper he had. He asked her to tell his children what they needed to know. He wrote what he wanted said. Then he made a cut on his wrist. He put the wrist to his mouth. His blood, he said, was so thick and dark from dehydration that it barely flowed. His body had already reduced his circulation to conserve what remained. His blood was the consistency of syrup. It stopped him. Not the pain, not fear. The thickness of his own blood told him something his reasoning had not yet processed. He was dehydrated far beyond what he had estimated. And he was still alive, and a body that far gone and still functioning was a body that was fighting harder than he had given it credit for. He stopped. He wrapped his wrist. He laid down in the shade of the shrine. He decided to see what the next morning looked like. The next morning, he walked. He walked the following 4 days. 9 days total from the moment the storm separated him from the race. What kept him alive across those days, after the bats, after the rationing ran out, was a combination of things that survival researchers who have since studied his case describe as a near-perfect execution of improvised desert survival. He found dew on rocks before sunrise and licked it from the surface. Trace amounts. Enough. Repeated daily. He found wild plants, sparse, tough desert vegetation, and consumed the moisture in their leaves and stems. He moved only at night and in the early morning, resting through the hours when the sun was directly overhead. His pace slowed to what he later described as barely movement. 1 foot in front of the other, no speed, pure direction. He kept a mental log. He narrated to himself out loud what he was doing and why, maintaining the structure of rational thought by giving it a voice. When his thinking began to drift, as it did increasingly as dehydration affected cognition, he used the narrative to find his way back to clarity. He walked. He stopped. He walked again. He was looking for any sign of human presence. Water, a path, a structure. On the 9th day, he found a Tuareg camp, a Tuareg family, a woman, her children, tending goats in the deep desert. He was, by this point, almost unrecognizable as the athlete who had entered the race 9 days before. He had lost approximately 16 kilograms. His skin had darkened and cracked from sun exposure. His eyes, he said, were not working correctly. The dehydration had affected his vision in ways that took weeks to fully resolve. The woman looked at him for a moment. Then she brought him goat's milk. Not water. Milk. Because water given too quickly to someone as dehydrated as he was would have caused his cells to rupture from the osmotic shock of sudden rehydration. The fat and protein in the milk slowed absorption to a rate his body could manage. She may have known this precisely. She may have simply known it the way people who live in the Sahara know things about the Sahara, not from study, from the accumulated practical wisdom of generations in the desert. Either way, she made the right call. He drank. He did not die. He was transferred to an Algerian military outpost, then to a hospital. Then, after the diplomatic complexities of an Italian national found in military-sensitive Algerian territory were resolved, a process that took additional days and involved the Italian consulate, he went home. His wife had been told he was missing on day 2 of his disappearance. She had been waiting for 9 days. She was waiting at the hospital when he arrived. He said in one interview that he doesn't remember the first thing she said because his hearing was compromised from dehydration, and he couldn't process language normally yet. He remembers that she was there. Here's what happened afterward. Because it is important, and because most versions of the story end at the rescue and miss the part that matters most. Mauro Prosperi recovered, fully, eventually, though the process took months. His kidneys had sustained damage. His liver showed stress indicators. His eyesight required extended recovery. 16 kilograms of body mass had been consumed by a body eating itself to stay alive. He went back, not immediately, not carelessly, but he went back to the Marathon des Sables. He entered it again in 1997, and again after that, and again. He has run the Marathon des Sables 10 times. He finished it in 2012 at the age of 55, becoming the oldest person to complete the race in the event's history at that point. He went back to the specific desert that almost killed him, the specific race, the specific terrain. People have asked him why. In every interview he has given, for 30 years, he gives the same answer every time. He says the desert didn't do anything wrong. He made a mistake. He paid for it. He learned from it. And he went back. I want to talk about the mistake. The actual mistake. The thing the title of this video refers to, because I have not named it directly yet, and I think it deserves its own space. The mistake was not entering the race unprepared. The mistake was not his navigation. His compass bearing was correct. The mistake was not his gear, not his training, not his experience level. The mistake was a single decision made in the first minutes of the storm, before he understood what the storm was going to be. When the sandstorm hit, the correct protocol for Marathon to Sables competitors was to stop, find shelter if possible, wait for the storm to pass. The organization would account for time lost to weather events. The race could be resumed. Mauro Prosperi kept running, not because he didn't know the protocol, because he had run in sandstorms before, shorter ones, less severe ones, and he had kept running, and it had been fine. His experience told him this was the same kind of thing as the things he had survived before. It wasn't, and by the time he understood it wasn't, when the storm had been going for 3 or 4 hours and the compass bearing was correct, but the terrain felt wrong. Stopping was no longer stopping. Stopping was sitting in a sandstorm with no shelter and no visibility, and no way to know if the storm would clear in an hour or 3 days. He was committed. The decision had compounded. The window in which stopping was the right answer had closed behind him without his noticing. This is a mistake that almost erased him. Not ignorance, not arrogance. The application of correct experience to an incorrect situation. The assumption, made in the first 60 seconds of decision, that this thing was like the other things. It almost always is, until once it isn't. There's a version of this story where Mauro Prosperi dies in the Algerian desert in April 1994. In that version, the search aircraft passes slightly west of his position on day 3, and he doesn't have the strength to signal. In that version, the Tuareg camp is 20 kilometers farther east, and he covers 19 of them before his body stops. In that version, any one of a dozen contingencies goes differently by a small margin, and the Tuareg woman brings milk to nobody because there is nobody to bring it to. That version almost happened. The version that actually happened required him to drink bad blood in a desert shrine, to talk himself back from a decision to die with his own blood's thickness, to walk 9 days on dew lick from rocks, and keep the kind of comprehensive, unbroken calm that most people cannot maintain for 9 hours. He maintained it for 9 days, without knowing it would end, without knowing the Tuareg camp was there, without knowing his wife was waiting. He walked because walking was what there was to do, and he did it with everything he had left, which was less than he had ever had, and it was still enough. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth, 9 million square kilometers, temperatures that make a mockery of the word extreme, a landscape so indifferent to human presence that the concept of mercy doesn't translate. Mauro Prosperi went back, trained, prepared, with a GPS unit and updated protocols, and the knowledge of exactly what the desert can take from a person in 8 hours of wind. And he ran. He ran because the alternative, letting one terrible thing become the definition of what a place is, was not acceptable to him. He ran because the desert wasn't the problem. He was, and he had fixed the problem. And he ran.